Hello again from the sports desk. It's a moment South African sports fans have been waiting for since lockdown began 18 months ago. The Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, has announced fans will be allowed to attend live sporting events. But there are restrictions. A maximum of 750 people are allowed at indoor venues and no more than 2,000 people at outdoor venues. Now, joining us to discuss this announcement is Kelvin Watt, who is the Managing Director of Capitalize Media. Good evening to you, Kelvin. Thank you so much for joining us. Did it have to take this long for fans to be allowed back in stadiums?
Absolutely not. I think it's something over the last 18 months. I think a lot of us in the sports industry have been very disappointed just how slow sport and the sports industry has been to react to some of the changes with respect to COVID restrictions. And, I think there's been a lot of criticism from the industry about the Ministry of Sport and its sort of role in this decision making, because it really feels like sport has always been the sort of last thing that's been on people's minds. And obviously we understand that it is a difficult situation for government to handle, but certainly the sports industry has been the industry perhaps hardest hit and the one that's had to wait the longest, even longer often than the liquor industry and many others, restaurant industry and others who've also come under some serious strain over the past sort of almost 2 years.
The Minister of Sport, Nathi Mthethwa, then says to you, Kelvin Watt, lives matter, and that there cannot be any chance of risking the lives of South Africans. So we will close venues for as long as we possibly need to.
Absolutely. I think fair enough. But, we've seen restaurants and so many other environments where people in much closer contact and not in outdoor venues, etc., being open. So, I think there's an argument on both sides. If it's safe enough for, people to be sitting in a restaurant environment, then it should be safe enough for sports fans at restricted numbers. Certainly, I think even the restricted numbers haven't been well thought through. I mean, if you look at the pictures that you're showing on screen at Soccer City, there's no doubt that, that FNB Stadium should be having a lot more than 2,000 people in it. It could have 2,000 or 3,000 people per stand or per area of the stands, and still not coming into the type of contact that we're seeing in restaurants and shopping centres and many other public venues.
So what are you saying? That perhaps they could have allowed at least about 10,000, 20,000 at a Soccer City? Maybe let's say that they would have had to essentially
Absolutely.
Decide the kind of venue and then the space that it can accommodate.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely the decision that should be made. And I think there was also an incredible opportunity which the sports industry gave towards the ministry and to government to say, let's use access back to sport and ticketing to be linked to the vaccination program. And let's encourage people to get vaccinated. And those who are vaccinated can come back into stadiums. I think there's been a missed opportunity there.
How heavy a knock do you think brands that are linked to sports, different kinds of sporting codes and the federations themselves, how heavy a knock do you think they've suffered?
Oh, it's immeasurable. I think the sports industry has been under some strain for the last 5 or 6 years in South Africa, and the last 18 months have really put it back, significantly. And it's going to be very difficult for a lot of sports codes and environments to recover from the setback. It's going to be a very difficult thing. I think it's going to take some time before brands have, built up the confidence again to start investing in sport to the levels that they were doing a couple of years ago. And as I say, we were already under some pressure from a sports industry because we just haven't hosted big international events for some time. The Lions Tour this year would have been a really important event from a South African perspective in terms of getting us back to a big global event again. We've obviously got the Netball World Cup coming, and hopefully by then we're going to be back to full stadiums. It's going to be critically important that we are, otherwise we won't be attracting any major sporting events to this country for the foreseeable future. And I'm not sure that the sports industry in this country broadly, from federations to private businesses to others, can survive much longer under the current circumstances.
Just before I let you go, Kelvin, you're mentioning that things need to go back to normal because the sports industry will not survive. But there is a fourth wave that is predicted to be coming in November, December. That is around the time usually when we have the incoming test series with the Proteas. There's going to be some netball events that are happening at that time as well, some rugby events that unfortunately won't be happening anymore in terms of the United Rugby Championship because they're going to be based in Italy. But there will be a lot going on in terms of sport throughout the festive season. How then does the government and federations handle the incoming fourth wave?
Well, I think obviously, as a sports industry, we've got to work very closely with government. We've got to put a lot of pressure on to get back to as close to a normal as we possibly can if we come out of it. And I think even more importantly, one of the biggest aspects that we often miss in this country is school sport and just how important it is in so many of our communities. About 95 to 98% of people that attend a live sporting match every week in South Africa are attending school sport events. So even in that environment, I think just from a mental health perspective of parents and their children and getting back to some level of normality, we need to be driving this back. And I think the big thing now is as much as sports back at sort of amateur and professional sport, we're waiting on the Department of Education to allow sports fans back at schools. And that's a critical area of development in our sort of sports ecosystem as well. So all of these things are still under some pressure. We certainly aren't out the woods yet. Obviously a positive step today. And I mean, as an industry, we're all very pleased about it. But we've got a long way to go.
Of course. Kelvin, thank you so much for joining us here on eNCA this evening. That is the MD of Capitalize Media, Kelvin Watt, of course, just sharing his thoughts on the announcement from the COCTA minister that fans will indeed be allowed back in stadiums, 750 indoor, 2,000 outdoor, and of course just saying that we need to some extent, get back to some sort of normalcy so that we can have a lot more fans back in sporting arenas. And sadly, that is where we leave it for now.